The train was still miles away, but the rails had already begun to hum. In the middle of the vast prairie, under a sky that held no boundaries, a woman sat alone beside the tracks. Her hands rested quietly in her lap. Her eyes, pale and unseeing, turned slightly toward the sound. Her name was Mary Whitmore, and she was blind. That morning, her husband had brought her there with soft words and a steady voice. "Just wait here, sweetheart. I won't be long," he'd said. Then he walked away and never looked back. She called his name once, not loudly, just enough that the wind could take it and hide it somewhere among the hills. The warmth of the sun shifted across her skin, and the sound of metal wheels far in the distance grew louder. Mary didn't move. She couldn't. She didn't know where to go, and worse, she didn't yet understand that she had been left there for a reason. The kind of betrayal Mary faced doesn't come with shouting or slamming doors. It comes gently, disguised in affection. It holds your hand while leading you to the edge. Her husband didn't need to raise his voice or his fists. He just needed to leave her blind and waiting in the path of a train with no way to escape. When the train passed, the engineer swore he'd seen something. A woman sitting calmly, as if waiting for something she knew would never stop. But when the search team arrived, there was no body, no blood, just one thing left behind. A scarf, folded gently in the dust, faded blue, and a scent of lavender that clung to the prairie like a secret too stubborn to disappear. Mary Whitmore was known in town as the sweet, blind girl with the lavender perfume. People remembered her kindness, her soft voice, and the way she always seemed to sense when someone needed comfort, even though she hadn't seen a face in years. She lived quietly with her husband Thomas in a small cabin just outside of Red Hollow, near the split in the tracks where the freight line met the passenger rail. No one ever imagined that same man, Thomas, would lead her into the desert one morning and never come back. Neighbors recalled seeing them ride out together in the early light. Mary sat side saddle, dressed in her blue shawl, her hand lightly resting on his. They assumed it was one of their quiet walks. They assumed wrong. Hours later, when Thomas returned alone, his clothes dusty and his face unreadable, no one asked questions. Not until the train rolled by and rumors began to spread like wildfire. There was talk of a woman on the tracks. Someone claimed they saw her from the hills, unmoving. Another swore the train whistle sounded longer than usual, like a cry of warning. But in the end, nothing remained except a folded scarf and footprints that vanished into dry earth. The town whispered. Some grieved. Others forgot. But the truth doesn't stay buried in the dust forever. If you want to know what really happened that day and who saw what no one else did, stay with this story. This isn't just about betrayal. It's about survival, vengeance, and a secret that refused to die. Subscribe and follow the trail. This one leads deeper than anyone thought. And if you're watching from a small town, tell us, where are you listening from? Mary Whitmore had always trusted the sound of footsteps more than faces. Ever since the accident that stole her sight 5 years earlier, she'd learned to listen, really listen. The way boots hit the porch, the pause in a breath before someone lies, the change in tone when love begins to rot. She used to believe Thomas would never hurt her. He was gentle, patient, and never raised his voice. But lately his steps had changed. Heavy, hesitant, like a man dragging guilt behind him. That morning his voice had a strange stillness. "Let's go for a ride, Mary," he said, brushing her hair behind her ear. She felt the wind shift even before they reached the trail. The old horse whinnied like it knew something wasn't right. Mary didn't question it. She leaned into Thomas's warmth, breathing in the scent of leather and dust. "You're quiet today," she whispered. He said nothing. Just clicked his tongue and steered the horse toward the rail line, toward silence. They stopped near a weathered bench by the tracks. Mary hadn't been there in years. She ran her fingers along the wood, cracked and dry like old bone. "It's peaceful out here," she murmured. Thomas helped her down gently, even fixed her shawl like he used to. "Just wait here, sweetheart. I'll be right back," he said. Then, with a kiss on her forehead, He walked away. She tilted her head, listening. His footsteps faded and never returned. At first, Mary sat calmly. She knew the land well, had walked it blindfolded for years before she lost her sight for good. But something about the air made her chest tighten. The breeze came from the wrong side. The sound of birds stopped, and beneath her the steel rails began to hum. Her instincts flared. Her husband had said he'd be right back, but he wasn't. And time, she'd learned, has a cruel way of telling the truth. She called his name once. Thomas. Her voice was soft, like a prayer or a test. The wind took it, swallowed it whole. She adjusted her shawl and tried to stay calm, but the humming grew louder. The earth trembled in warning. She felt the wooden slats under her shift ever so slightly. Mary turned her face toward the direction of the sound, hoping foolishly that he might be nearby, hiding just out of reach, waiting to surprise her. He wasn't. Far off, the whistle blew, long and mournful. It echoed across the plains like a cry from the beyond. Mary clutched her skirt, her breathing shallow. This wasn't right. None of it felt right. Thomas, she whispered again, but now it wasn't a question. It was a realization. Her throat tightened. Her hands gripped the edge of the bench. Her mind raced through every recent moment. The silences, the cold dinners, the way he no longer kissed her goodnight. What kind of man plans something like this? What sort of heart tells a woman he loves her while leading her to her grave? Mary's mind reeled, and her body refused to move. She didn't know which direction was safe, which steps would lead to escape or death. Her world was black, and the sound of the train was growing teeth. She felt tears sting the corners of her eyes. Was this how it ended? Forgotten, used, and left like a rag doll on the tracks? But Mary Whitmore wasn't made of porcelain. Inside her lived the quiet, coiled strength of every woman who had survived heartbreak and kept walking. She took a breath. Slow, steady. She counted the seconds between the rail's vibrations. She pressed her palm to the ground and listened, not with her ears, but with her bones. Somewhere out there, far from the tracks, there had to be a way. And somewhere behind her, she knew Thomas was already riding home, alone. The train approached like a beast without mercy. Its wheels screamed across the iron, and still Mary didn't move. She wasn't sure where to go, how far she could get, but she refused to scream, refused to give him that. If this was the end, it would be silent, dignified. She straightened her spine, held her chin high. Then something shifted, a faint shuffle in the grass behind her. A breath, not the wind, not the train. Something, or someone, was watching. And just before the shadows could swallow the moment, the screen of fate paused. Mary didn't know it then, but what happened next would change everything, because somewhere out there in the hills, a pair of eyes had seen what Thomas never thought anyone would. Eyes that didn't belong to a man of law or a preacher or a friend, but to someone unexpected. Someone quiet, someone who didn't believe in letting the weak die just because the strong had failed them. The stranger had been camping near the ridgeline for 3 days. He hadn't planned on staying that long, but something about the town's silence kept him uneasy. He never gave his name, and no one dared ask. He wore a long coat, dusty and dark, and carried a rifle older than most buildings in Red Hollow. Locals whispered that he had once been a bounty hunter or maybe a deserter. Truth was, he spoke little and slept less. That morning, while setting snares for rabbits, he saw a horse return alone, and he knew something was wrong. He followed the trail down toward the tracks, not in haste, but not idly either. He'd seen too many things go ignored in this land. As he crested the hill above the bend, he froze. There she was, a woman, alone on the bench, hands folded like a doll left in a storm. The shawl draped around her shoulders moved gently with the breeze, and though she didn't move, her face was tilted toward the sound of the oncoming train. He scanned the land. No wagon, no man, just her, waiting. Or worse, abandoned. The rifle shifted on his back. His instincts, long dulled by whiskey and regret, came alive. He moved fast, but careful not to startle her. His boots made no sound on the dry grass. He crouched behind the mesquite bush, watching, waiting for any sign this was a trap. But all he saw was fear, raw and quiet, in the way her fingers dug into the edge of the bench. And the sound. The train was close, too close. He had seconds to decide, interfere or stay hidden, risk exposure or let the story end like all the others. Then she whispered a name, Thomas. The way she said it, like she still believed he'd come back, twisted something inside him. He stood. Without a word, he stepped into the clearing. The noise of the train swallowed everything, but she turned her head toward the sound of his steps. Her lips trembled. "Thomas?" she asked again. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, gently gripping her arm. Her skin flinched under his touch, unsure, frightened. She couldn't see him. She had no idea who he was, but she didn't pull away. He didn't speak, didn't have time to explain. The train was nearly upon them. With one hand, he lifted her shawl and tied it around her face like a blindfold. Instinct. Dust rose around them as he swept her into his arms. She weighed little. Her bones felt like feathers and memory. The bench scraped behind them as he stepped off the tracks into the wild brush. The train roared past, a beast of smoke and iron, just as the edge of her dress fluttered out of reach. The ground shook, but they were alive. Mary couldn't breathe, not because she was hurt, but because she was still trying to understand. Who had touched her? Who had moved her? She tried to speak, but the words stayed trapped between her ribs. The stranger placed her down gently under the shade of a sycamore tree. She clutched her chest, heart thundering. Who are you?" she managed. He didn't answer, just pulled a canteen from his coat and placed it in her hand. Water, cold, clean, real. She drank like it might disappear. He stood back, watching, measuring. Mary's breath slowed. She reached for him, her fingers brushing the rough wool of his coat. "You're not Thomas," she whispered. A pause, then quieter. "Thank God." That made something flicker in his face, though she couldn't see it. He knelt beside her, still didn't speak, just watched the tracks. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of rusted iron and disturbed dust. The train was gone, but the truth remained. Someone had left her there, someone she trusted, and someone else had seen it all. In town, Thomas was already telling lies. He claimed Mary wandered off, said she had grown confused, delusional, that she'd begged to be alone and then vanished. The sheriff didn't believe him, but he had no proof otherwise. No body, no scream. Just a scarf folded by the rails and the stink of something that didn't add up. Red Hollow had buried bigger sins under thinner dirt, but this one felt different. Some folks started to whisper, others just waited. Because secrets in the West never stay quiet for long. Back under the sycamore, Mary asked again, "Who are you?" The stranger finally spoke. Just 3 words. "You were watched." His voice was dry as bone, but steady. She tilted her head. "Why did you help me?" He looked away. "Didn't feel right," he said. Simple as that. Then he stood, adjusted his coat and looked toward the west. The sun was already lowering, casting long shadows across the plains. "Where are we going?" she asked, rising to her feet slowly. He didn't answer. Not yet. But he knew exactly where they had to go next. They left at dawn. The air was crisp, and the prairie still slept under a blanket of mist. Mary walked slowly, one hand on the stranger's arm, the other tracing the rhythm of the earth beneath her boots. She said nothing, and neither did he. Words felt too small for what had happened. The train, the betrayal, the miracle of breath still in her lungs. As the sun rose behind them, their shadows stretched long across the dry grass, one blind woman and a man with no past, heading somewhere neither had named. The stranger walked with purpose, though his face stayed blank. Mary listened to everything, the wind shifting, the rustle of distant brush, the creak of his coat with each step. She had questions, but kept them for later. She needed time to trust her own thoughts again. She hadn't just been left to die. She'd been discarded by the one person who swore to love her. That wound went deeper than skin. And now, beside a man whose name she didn't know, she felt safer than she ever had with Thomas. Back in Red Hollow, the town began to stir. Word of Mary's disappearance had spread fast. The sheriff, a man with more doubts than power, tried to keep order, but even he couldn't ignore the holes in Thomas's story. A few ranchers remembered seeing Mary on horseback that morning. A boy swore he heard a woman calling a name near the tracks. Thomas shrugged it all off. "She's blind, got confused," he said. But behind his eyes there was a flicker. Fear. Because deep down, Thomas knew something he hadn't planned on. Mary might have survived. Mary and the stranger followed the riverbed west, stopping only when the sun was too high to bear. He offered her food, dried meat and a hunk of bread. She ate in silence, her hands shaking. He watched her with cautious respect, like someone who'd once known fragility and feared breaking it again. When she finally spoke, her voice was dry. "Why were you there?" He hesitated. "Didn't mean to be. Wrong place, right moment." That was all he said. But she understood the truth behind it. He wasn't there by accident. Something had brought him back to that place. "Do you have a name?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. "Call me Boone," he said. It might have been true, or it might have been the name he used when he wanted to be forgotten. Either way, it didn't matter. Mary smiled faintly. "Thank you, Boone." Her words carried weight. Gratitude, trust, something that had been taken from her and given back in one desperate act. Boone looked away, uncomfortable. He wasn't used to being needed. He wasn't used to saving anyone. But something about her, the way she carried herself, blind but unbroken, unsettled him in a way he couldn't name. By nightfall, they made camp near an old mining outpost, long abandoned and swallowed by weeds. Mary sat near the fire, listening to the crackle, the coyotes far off, and the way Boone sharpened his knife in steady strokes. "You think he's looking for me?" she asked. Boone shook his head. "He thinks you're dead." Mary nodded slowly. "Let him think that a little longer." Her voice had changed, colder now, steadier. She wasn't just running. She was beginning to plan. Boone noticed. He didn't say it aloud, but he'd seen that look before. Not in her eyes, but in her posture. She was preparing. Back in town, Thomas stood in the saloon with a glass of whiskey he hadn't touched. Every clink of boots on wood made him turn. Every whisper made his shoulders stiffen. He'd done what he had to do, hadn't he? A blind wife, helpless, dependent, didn't fit the life he wanted anymore. The younger widow at the general store had been smiling more lately. He had plans. But now, Mary's name lingered like a ghost in every conversation. And worse, someone said the scarf found on the tracks hadn't been torn. It had been folded, like someone had left it behind, intentionally. The next morning, Boone led Mary toward an old trail that would eventually cross with the northern pass. "What's out there?" she asked. "Answers," he said. She didn't press. He knew things, people, maybe, who could help. She could feel it in the way he moved. He wasn't just a wanderer, he was running from something too. They were two ghosts now, walking among the living. Mary didn't need her eyes to know danger was ahead, but something had already shifted inside her. She wasn't waiting to be saved anymore. As they crossed a narrow ridge, Mary stopped. "There's something I need to do," she said. Boone turned. "You're not ready to go back?" "Not yet," she replied, "but I won't run forever." She reached into her pocket and unfolded the same scarf that had been left by the tracks, the one she had folded herself, seconds before the train arrived. "This is all they think that's left of me," she said. Boone nodded. "Let it stay that way, for now." And together they moved forward, not as prey, but as something else entirely. A letter arrived at the sheriff's office with no name and no return address. Just a single sheet of paper, stained by dust and time, with 5 words written in neat, deliberate print. She is not where you think. The sheriff read it 3 times, his gut twisting. He knew lies and he knew panic. This was neither. He folded the note slowly and slid it into his coat. Somewhere deep down, he'd always hoped Mary Whitmore hadn't died. Now that hope had teeth. Thomas stood by the general store, laughing too loud, sipping whiskey before noon. He was trying to seem unbothered, but his smile was paper thin. The town was changing. People glanced at him longer than usual. Some avoided him. Others whispered. Rumors had begun to rise like dust after rain. Persistent, clinging, impossible to hide. One old man claimed he'd seen footprints near the canyon trail. Another swore someone matching Mary's height was spotted at a dry spring. No one confronted Thomas yet, but they would, eventually. 2 weeks had passed since the tracks. Boone and Mary now moved only at dawn and dusk, avoiding roads, sleeping beneath the bones of dead cottonwoods. Mary walked taller. She no longer clutched his arm. Instead, she used her cane, tapping confidently, memorizing each sound, each texture. Boone noticed it, the change. She asked fewer questions, gave more directions. There's a creek ahead, she'd say. I smell moss. She was blind, yes, but she was no longer lost, and she was no longer afraid. One evening, they stopped near a bluff that overlooked a half-buried church. Mary sat facing the wind, her face calm. I want to go back, she said. Boone didn't answer right away. He sat beside her, slicing an apple with a worn blade. You sure? He asked. I'm not going back to beg, she replied. I'm going back to be seen. The words settled between them like thunder in the distance. For the first time, Boone smiled. It was small, but real. He'd seen vengeance before, but this wasn't that. This was resurrection. Mary wrote a letter. She didn't sign it. She didn't need to. The handwriting was unmistakable. She asked Boone to deliver it to the sheriff without being seen. What does it say? He asked. She thought for a moment. It says I'm coming home, and the man who tried to bury me should start digging for himself. Boone nodded. No flourish, no drama, just truth. He tucked the letter under his coat and left that night, traveling under the stars like a shadow with a purpose. When the sheriff opened the letter the next day, his hand shook. He read it once, then again, then held it against the light like it might disappear. His deputy asked what it said, but he didn't answer. Instead, he stood, put on his hat, and rode straight to Thomas Whitmore's house. Thomas met him on the porch, smug and lazy. Back again, he said. The sheriff stared at him. Do you believe in ghosts? He asked. Thomas blinked. What are you talking about? I think yours is about to rise, the sheriff replied, then rode away. Back in the hills, Mary prepared. Not with guns, not with violence, but with memory. She recited every detail from the morning of her betrayal. The sound of Thomas's boots, the way his voice cracked when he kissed her goodbye, the feel of the bench, the position of the sun. She built a map in her mind, not of places, but of truths. She wasn't going back to prove anything. She was going back because she no longer needed permission to exist. The morning they crossed into Red Hollow, the town didn't notice them at first. Boone led the horse slowly. Mary sat straight, wrapped in her shawl, her chin high. Dust swirled around them. Eyes widened. A child dropped a bucket. An old woman gasped. Someone whispered her name like it summoned spirits. Mary Whitmore had returned. Alive, silent, whole. She didn't smile, she didn't wave, she just walked. And every step said, what words could not? You didn't break me. Thomas was in the saloon when he heard the silence. He stepped outside, squinting into the light. And there she was, standing still, facing him, eyes blind but burning. The scarf she once folded on the tracks now tied around her neck like a flag. He dropped his glass. The sound of it shattering was the only thing anyone heard for miles. Mary took one step forward, then another. And still, she said nothing. Because sometimes, the loudest voice is the one that survived. The saloon doors creaked as Mary stepped inside. Dust followed her boots. The air was thick with sweat, smoke, and disbelief. Every eye in the room turned toward her. No one spoke. Thomas stood frozen by the bar, one hand still halfway to his whiskey. He looked at her like she was a ghost, something he had buried and now refused to stay down. "Mary," he said, voice small, but she didn't flinch. She didn't need to see him. She could smell the fear in his breath. Boone stood at the doorway, rifle slung but untouched. He said nothing. This wasn't his moment. Mary walked slowly, her cane tapping with each step. She stopped just short of Thomas. Her face was calm, but her voice sliced like wind through canyon walls. "You left me to die," she said. Not a question, a statement. And though it was quiet, the room felt the words like a slap. Thomas's jaw clenched. "You don't know what you're talking about." "I know you kissed my forehead," she said, then walked away and didn't turn back. "I know you waited for the train to come and hoped it would do what you didn't have the guts to do yourself." The silence cracked. Someone near the back muttered a curse. Another man shifted in his chair. Mary's voice remained steady. "I folded my scarf, Thomas. You told them I was confused, but you didn't count on me surviving, or on someone watching." Boone's presence behind her was confirmation enough. Thomas took a step back. "You don't have proof," he said, laughing nervously. "What? You're going to tell them some drifter saved you, that you magically escaped?" Mary tilted her head. "No, I'm going to tell them the truth, and they'll believe me, because this town knows you. They know how you lie, how you drink, how you charm. They've seen the bruises I never spoke about." Murmurs spread. The bartender set his glass down slowly, eyes narrowed. No one laughed now. The sheriff stepped forward from the crowd, no badge on his chest today, just a look of quiet reckoning. "Thomas," he said, "we searched the tracks, found that scarf folded neat. No blood, no struggle, just quiet intent." He looked at Mary. "We hoped you were alive. Now we know, and that makes your story the only one that matters." Thomas swallowed hard. "You can't prove what I meant to do," he spat. "That's not a crime." The sheriff crossed his arms. "Maybe not, but leaving someone to die, that'll be enough." Mary turned to the room, her voice carried like prayer. "I don't want revenge. I want to live. I want my name back. I want to walk these streets without people wondering if I was ever real. I want to be more than the woman who was left behind." Her words struck something deep. The women in the room looked at her differently now. The men looked at the floor. Thomas was no longer the center. He was shrinking. Boone walked forward, standing at her side, still silent, still steady. Mary reached into her pocket and pulled out the folded scarf, the same one Thomas thought marked her death. She placed it gently on the bar. "You left this behind," she said, "but I kept it, not as a reminder of you, but of me, of who I became the moment I realized I was alone and still chose to stand." Then she turned, slowly, and walked out. Boone followed. The doors swung behind them like a heartbeat. Outside, the sun was rising high. Red Hollow was quiet, not out of fear, but respect. People stepped aside as Mary passed. Some nodded, some whispered. She didn't smile, but she no longer looked down. Her feet touched the ground with purpose. Her story was hers again. She had faced the man who tried to erase her, and she didn't need to raise her voice to destroy him. Sometimes, surviving is the sharpest revenge of all. They didn't stop walking until they reached the edge of town. Boone adjusted his rifle strap. "What now?" he asked. Mary turned her head slightly, listening to the breeze. "Now I live," she said. "Somewhere new, somewhere quiet, but not hiding." Boone nodded. He didn't ask to come. He didn't offer to stay. But something in the way he stood beside her made it clear, whatever path she chose, she wouldn't be walking it alone. And in the dust behind them, Red Hollow began to whisper a new story. Not about a cruel man, not about a blind woman, but about the memory she left behind, and how it was never hers to carry alone. Years later, travelers passing through Red Hollow would sometimes hear the story of the blind woman left to die on the tracks and the ghost who saved her. Some said she vanished into the desert. Others claimed she started a quiet life in the north, teaching children to listen with more than just their eyes. No one knew for sure, but every so often a scarf would appear on the edge of the rails, faded blue, folded with care. Thomas Whitmore disappeared not long after. Some say he left town. Some say the guilt consumed him. But Red Hollow never spoke his name again, not in the saloon, not in the church, not even in anger. What he tried to bury never stayed buried, because the woman he underestimated refused to stay silent. She had no need for revenge. She had something better, her voice, her truth, and her survival. And Boone? He was last seen walking beside a woman in a blue shawl near the mouth of the canyon, where the wind carries stories farther than any map. They didn't look back. Some journeys don't need witnesses, just footprints, a heartbeat, and a memory too stubborn to fade.